Hi, welcome. It's good to see everyone. We're going to give it just a moment for everyone to join today's webinar, so we'll just be silent for just a minute and let everybody join. Okay, see the numbers are still climbing, but they're leveling off a little bit. So maybe we can get going. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's great to see you. This is our best application advice webinar. I think, in the past we've called this the webinar formerly known as Application Tips Panel. This is an hour that we have together where we hopefully will dispense as much hopefully good advice to you as we can about our Yale SOM application for those of you who are thinking about applying this upcoming cycle. I'm Bruce Delmonico, Assistant Dean for Admissions here at the Yale School of Management. I am thrilled to be here with you. So New Haven native, been at Yale SOM for 18 plus years, have been up and down the East Coast and West, Rhode Island, Virginia, Texas, Georgia, but back in New Haven and really enjoying being in New Haven, and have helped build the application over the last 2 decades. So I'm going to provide whatever insights I can, and joined by my colleague Laurel Grodman.
Hi everyone, Laurel Grodman, also Assistant Dean for Admissions. I have also kind of uncannily maybe been at Yale about the same amount of time as Bruce, but in a couple of different capacities. I did my undergraduate degree at Yale. I'm a proud Yale SOM graduate as well, and I have been here in admissions for many years as well. And so I am in charge of evaluation, building our application, and have been overseeing our admissions committee for the better part of the last decade. So also glad to be here. This is one of my favorite events.
So, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So between the two of us, we have decades of experience sort of building the application, and in Laurel's case, we're sort of running the process. So we have hopefully some good insights into the application and how you might want to think about approaching it from your perspective as a candidate, as an applicant. We also have lots of experience of being in New Haven, so we're going to try and sprinkle our advice with maybe some insights and fun facts into just kind of Yale and New Haven more generally, just to keep things a little more, hopefully a little more lively, a little more interesting. But we do have a lot of ground to cover. And as I said, we do put a lot of thought into the application, how it's constructed, what we ask, when we ask it, and how we view it. And so we're going to try and cover a lot of ground. We did solicit questions from you all before this session. We've tried to incorporate those into part of the programming, as my must be getting darker here and where I am. Try and incorporate as much of those questions into the programming here today, and try and answer as many of those questions as we can, as well as go through the elements of the application and give you some advice about those specific sections, and maybe some general advice as well. So we're going to try and cover a lot. But as I said, we put a lot of thought into the application. Our guiding principle is to be economical in what we ask for, not to ask for things that we feel are unnecessary or extraneous to the review process. And really, the application itself it's a living thing. It's evolved over the years. It continues to evolve. When I started, for example, we had, I think, 4 essays, went down to 2, now 1. And one of the things we're trying to do is really kind of broaden the base of inputs we're asking, and the diversity of inputs, to try to allow you to present the fullest picture of yourself as possible, and really give us the fullest sense of who you are as a person, as well as trying to be fair and more consistent in our approach and our evaluation. How that looks in practice, we'll get to throughout the session. But as an example, the last couple of years, including this year, we've added and expanded the question we ask about context and background information, so that we can get, again, a fuller sense of you, more sense of the context, the circumstances in which you've studied and worked in your time up till now. We've also, for example, expanded questions we ask about entrepreneurship, because we know a lot of you are entrepreneurs or in a small business, family business, startup, and we want to get, again, a better sense, working in conjunction with Kyle Jensen, who leads our entrepreneurship center here, get a better sense of the kinds of questions we should be asking you to really elicit the most helpful information for us in evaluating your candidacy and allow you to again, share the fullest picture of you as a candidate. So I think that's a little bit about how we approach the application, how we construct it. And I think maybe I can hand off to Laurel to talk a little bit about our admissions philosophy here at SOM, in the moment now.
Yeah, sure. And I'll do this because I think it might be helpful to have a little bit of a context about how we're thinking about constructing and reviewing the application as a guide to how you approach your responses throughout the application. But as Bruce mentioned, we really do spend an intensive period of time each year looking at our application, looking at how we evaluate it, and thinking about what kinds of revisions we want to make year over year to allow you to share your story most effectively. And so while you mentioned adding things, we also think about what to take out. We realize that applying to business school is a big job. It takes a lot of time, and we really want to be economical about what we ask. There's so much that we're curious about, but we try to narrow it down to things that are really going to matter within our application review. So hopefully you'll find that the questions that we ask you feel intentional, and know that on our end, we ask them all because we have intent to review and consider them within our evaluation process. And so within that, we're really focused on things that are predictive of the outcomes that matter. We're big believers that, past actions and past performance are the best predictors of where you're going to go going forward. And so everything within our application really ladders up to understanding one or more of three things. So it's your performance in the classroom, your potential for professional success, and then your propensity to contribute to our community. So again, everything that we ask you within that application will give us information about one or more of those areas. And sort of, as Bruce mentioned, we'll also ask you about where you're coming from, what you're interested in, because that's kind of the glue between or among those three things, and helps us frame our understanding of your academics or your professional experience or your community involvement through your own unique experiences. And with that, we engage in what many of you might be familiar with, is called holistic review. So that means we look at every aspect of your application. All of it is relevant, and it's also not specifically weighted in one way or another. We're looking at it all in context, and so I think that can be sometimes a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. So I'll try to give you a concrete example there. So for instance, people I know are very concerned about test scores and how much weight is given to a test score, and are there cutoffs and that sort of thing. So what I would say is there's no specific weight given to test score within our evaluation process. It really is dependent upon your academic and your professional background. And so, for instance, we'll rely more on specifically the quantitative section of your GMAT or your GRE if you were a literature major who's working in a non-quantitative job than if you are an econ major working in finance, where we have other evidence of your quantitative preparation. So that's more of a concrete sense of what it means to not have a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, and it truly is holistic review, where we decide what sorts of weights to apply based on the other context you've shared within your application. And all of this is in service of, we're looking to assemble a class that's diverse among a range of dimensions: background, experience, perspective, geography, demographic dimensions. So there's not one right-size-fits-all profile that we're looking for. And that's why, again, we do holistic review and look at all of the things that you bring to the table. And so with that sort of general sense of the process, why don't we dive into some specific questions that we know come up a lot, both about the application process as a whole, and then maybe more specifically about some of the elements of our application.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I'll go first. Actually, just generally, I think something that I'm sure people are wondering about: how do we read an application? What are the mechanics of that process?
Yeah, and so I think one thing that's really important to know is no one single person has eyes on your on your application. We have a process by which we really believe that the more perspectives that we bring to the table, the more we can help mitigate biases, the more that we can, catch on to something that someone else may have missed. And so there will be multiple reviewers of your application at various points. But generally speaking, there will be two readers of an application who will read the file in full. Those are independent reads. They don't know what the other has seen or said about an application. So again, looking to kind of mitigate bias. And then there are various stages at which our entire admissions committee will come together to review an application. We make decisions by smaller committee around interview invitations, and then it is our full admissions committee in the end that discusses and makes decisions on every candidate who will ultimately be admitted to the program. So again, I think the thing to take away there is multiple eyes, multiple perspectives on each application. All right, so Bruce, how do we evaluate fit?
Yeah, and I feel like this is maybe a little bit of a trick question because for us, fit is a kind of a fraught concept. I think it's understandable. Obviously, you all want to end up at the school that is most aligned with your values and your interests, and we do very much believe that here at Yale SOM we have a really transformative mission to educate leaders for business and society, and the values that support that are very meaningful. But we realize that I think to Laurel's point about mitigating bias and wanting to heighten consistency and be fair in the process, one challenge is something, fit is a very squishy term. It's very subjective. It can mean different things to different people. And we want to make sure we're being, again, fair and consistent in the process. So we're very careful about how we evaluate, how we construct the evaluation process. And we think of fit more as a matching process between you all as candidates and us as a school. And so it doesn't come into play necessarily in how we're making decisions, that we're using that as a lever in that part of the process, but more we use the entire admissions process, the entire admissions cycle, to help educate you about our mission, our values, what we believe in, and see if that aligns with what you're looking for in a school. And and that's where hopefully we end up with a class that is really very mission oriented, kind of perpetuates the values of the school. It's less about using fit as a sort in the evaluation process, in my mind at least. So that said, I would like, Laurel, I know there are lots of questions about if you have a Yale connection or there's an alumni interest, how if at all can that come into the process? How about visiting campus or attending events? Like, does that inform our evaluation anyway? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that fits a lot into your last response there. That these aren't the things that we're judging within the process. We're not looking to see how much connection you've been able to form with the Yale community prior to applying, whether that's expressed through visiting campus or connecting with students. All of those activities are for your benefit, to learn about the school and learn whether this is the place where you want to spend 2 years studying and learning. That's not of concern within our application process. So I hope that that's something of a relief, that the burden of having to prove your interest and prove how much you want to come to Yale is not part of this process. Again, we hope that you're learning about this along the way, but there's really no explicit place to be talking about that within your application, and we're not looking at that information in any way. If you happen to have worked for a Yale SOM alum who is the person who is in the best position to write your letter of recommendation because they were your direct supervisor, wonderful, that's great. It's not, I certainly wouldn't go out of your way to find somebody who you have a more tenuous connection to become a part of your application process, only if it's there organically. All right, so this was a little bit more of a strategy question, maybe. Should I apply in round 1 or round 2? Does it make a difference? And I guess I should mention there is a round 3 as well.
Yeah. Or applying through the consortium or the QuestBridge, but in terms of applying directly to us, right? 3 application rounds. Round 1, the round 1 deadline is almost exactly a month from today, September 12th. Round 2, early January. Round 3, mid-April. And this is a common question we get. is there a benefit to applying in one round versus another? And again, the caveat I would put here, I mean, this applies to all the things we're saying, but maybe this in particular, some schools might tell you something different, but this is the Yale advice. But what you likely will hear from most schools, which we very much agree with, is you should apply when you have your strongest application ready. So if in a month, on September 12th, that's the case and you're ready to apply, by all means, submit. And one of the benefits of applying early is obviously you get a decision early, which is nice. But if you need extra time to secure a recommendation, to take the GMAT or the GRE, to accumulate more work experience, whatever it is, you should take that time. And I would, I guess maybe sort of somewhat circuitously now get to the answer to the question, which is it really doesn't matter which round you apply in terms of round 1 or round 2, and even potentially round 3 in terms of your chances of being admitted. We actually, I say we, this is really Laurel, models the application cycle so that you have roughly the same chance of admission regardless of what round you apply. We apply, and we want to make sure we're conscious of how many applications we're likely to get in each round, and we want to be we're mindful of that going into the cycle. And even in round 3, I'll say I think the advice admissions officers tend to give is that there are fewer seats available in round 3. It's not inherently the case. I think the challenge with round 3 is it's just more variable. Round 3, we modeled to admit in all 3 rounds, 1, 2, and 3. The round 3 numbers are somewhat contingent on how many people enroll from rounds 1 and 2. So it's not that there are inherently fewer seats available. It's just that depending on how many people enroll from the first 2 rounds, there might be as many as we've modeled for. There might be more, there might be fewer. We just don't know. It depends on the year. But the bottom line is that there's no, for us at least, there's no strategic advantage of applying round 1 and round 2, and you really should be guided by applying when you have your strongest application ready. So another question, if I'll toss it to you, Laurel, is in reviewing applications, are there any red flags that would automatically disqualify a candidate?
I'm going to pick up the pace here and just say no. I mean, that's the point of holistic review. We have to see everything in its totality to make a decision. So there's no one aspect of your application that's going to be a hard no. All right. How is the Yale application process unique?
Well, I'm going to have a longer answer, so thanks for reserving time for me on that. I think there are a number of ways. But from Laurel and my earlier comments, obviously we do try to put thought into how we're constructing the application. We have tried to expand the range of inputs that go into what the application looks like. So it's not just an essay writing contest, but we're trying to hear from you in different contexts, in different ways, get at different aspects of you as a person. All, as Laurel said, all laddering up into the things that we're hoping to predict in terms of your academic performance, your professional potential, and your community engagement. And there are and some of those elements are things that you will also see in other applications, but there are some unique elements. I won't go into all the details. I think two of the ones that I would call out are our video questions and our behavioral assessment, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more as we go through the specific elements of the application. But again, the idea behind those is the video questions are meant to really hear from you directly, as opposed to your written submission, but to actually have more of an interactive and dynamic engagement with you as a candidate. And then the behavioral assessment, which we'll talk about more, something we developed with ETS over a number of years that helps. It's additive to our evaluation of your academic potential, and it's really meant to expand and diversify the range of candidates we're able to consider and bring into the class here at Yale. And we'll talk more about that. But those are two things I would point to as somewhat unique to us here at Yale SOM. Throwing it back, this is not a yes/no, so you might actually have to answer a little bit more on this one. But what is the biggest mistake you see among candidates? And I guess kind of a compound question: how would you stand out as an applicant?
Oh, I think it might be the same response to both of those, which is, I don't think it's a good idea to orient your application around trying to stand out or thinking about how you compare to others. Applying is really an individual experience. I know it doesn't feel that way when you know that there's a committee reviewing multiple candidates and making choices, but we're really looking at each one of you individually and not how similar or different you are to the last person or the first person that we reviewed. It's just not the way that the process works. And I think we often get questions that are sort of a flavor of this of, oh, I'm an engineer, or I'm a consultant, or, you know, pick any sort of particular background. How do I differentiate myself from others? And the answer is, I really don't think you have to. We actually have room for lots of great engineers and lots of great consultants, and we're not building a class in that sense. I think you need to think about how to present your best application that best highlights the experiences that you've had, the accomplishments that you've had, and really don't worry about what that looks like compared to anyone else's. It's not how we're thinking about evaluating your candidacy. So, and I think sometimes when you frame it through how do I look different, it ends up just, it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel genuine to who you are. Just my advice there is just tell your story the way it is and don't worry about what others are or how others are telling their story, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you for that. And hopefully those are some specific questions that I think are common among candidates that did come into us before the session. So hopefully that answers a few kind of pressing questions that you all have. I think what we'd like to do now is maybe shift gears slightly and maybe go section by section a little bit through the application and just touch on a few things relative to each section. I would also point out there are a number of other resources we have in addition to, you know, other online sessions, office hours, workshops, Q&As. Our application guide is live, and that does maybe more thorough sorting of the various sections and advice. We did also update our application instructions this year. The instructions are actually in the application to try to, I think, help ground you more and be a little bit more kind of provide more context for why we're asking for the things we're asking and what we're looking for to hopefully help guide you even in the instructions with how to approach the various sections of the application. I know, Laurel, you were the main driver there. I don't know if there are any additional thoughts to share on those fronts.
Yeah, I think if you haven't already, opening up an application is probably the best way to get grounded in what we're looking for. I mean, obviously there's a lot of very specific detail in there around how you upload a transcript and that kind of thing, but we have kind of framing instructions for each section as well, that some of it will be a repeat of what we're saying today, but I think will just be a helpful reminder of why we're asking for certain information and what mindset to kind of be in when you're responding to the prompts, so that we're getting the information that we're seeking from you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's great. And hopefully between the enhanced application instructions and the application guide, you have the resources available to you to be able to kind of attack the application and approach it, although that sounds a little more, maybe a little more violent than it should be. But let's go through the elements of the application here and talk through some common questions and maybe touch on a number of different topics. Let's start with sort of that again, Laura said one of the things we're looking to predict is your performance, your classroom performance here at SOM. So two ways that we do that are through your academics and your test scores. And I think in candidates in kind of self-assessing and looking at how your competitiveness for the program, often look at averages that we posted on the website and elsewhere. One question is, what if my grades or scores are below average? How can I address that?
Yeah. So I think, averages are just that. By definition, half of our class is going to be below them and half are above. So I actually think it's probably the ranges that we share that are the more useful sort of benchmark to be thinking about. And of course, I think we post our middle 80% on tests and GPAs. But I think really the way to think about it, it's not that we don't admit people who are above or below those ranges by any means, but it gives you a sense, again, thinking about that we use test scores and academic, background, your transcripts, behavioral assessment, as well as Bruce mentioned, a few things to look at your academics. I think what you want to think about is if you are sort of out of range on one of those dimensions, where are you on another? So there are people with exceptional undergraduate records and less strong test scores. So that's good. We have a data point there that shows your academic strength. That's a good starting point. So again, think about these things in combination. But if you feel like there is something that you do need to address, if there's something that you need the committee to know, I think the concrete thing to do is be self-aware. If you have a weakness, think about what it is and think about what you can do to help kind of address it. So if you haven't had quantitative exposure before, is there coursework that you can take to demonstrate that you are learning in that area and getting up to speed? If you're, if you took a class in undergrad that you weren't happy with where things netted out. I mean, it doesn't make sense in every case, but it doesn't make sense to get some additional exposure or point to exposure you've had to that subject matter in your work life. These are just some examples. But we do give you space to talk about these things. So if you have an area of your academic history, for instance, that you want to explain what was going on in your life during it, you have the optional statement to help provide some clarity and context there. The same goes for testing. I mean, like Bruce said, I think it's good to be able to give yourself enough time before you apply to be able to take the test more than once if you need to. But if for whatever reason that's not a possibility, it's useful to give us the context there. So I think that's how you address it.
That's great. And you talked about sort of the transcripts and the academic background. I know some candidates have also some graduate study behind them. How are master's degrees viewed in the review process?
I mean, not positively or negatively. They're just another fact of your academic journey and may help inform why you're here at the business school application process in some way. So maybe it works its way into talking about your career interests somehow. We're looking at that academic performance, much like we would look at undergraduate performance. If you performed better in graduate program than maybe you wanted to in undergraduate program, that's additive as well. We're looking at the trajectory of your academic performance, but it's not inherently a plus or a minus in any way within the evaluation process.
Okay. And I think you might have touched on this, sort of getting back to sort of the GMAT, GPA. How are those weighted? What percentages do they count for in the review process?
Yeah, I'll say again, there is no set percent, and there isn't even a set percentage that we're kind of looking at your academic preparation. As I said before, we're looking at academics, your professional impact, and your community involvement. And I think we want to make sure, obviously, the candidates that we admit to the program we're setting people up for success in the classroom and are going to thrive. But those are really the three things that we're looking at in balance with everyone. So no specific weightings.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. This is a little bit more process oriented, but what are the mechanics of submitting transcripts and test scores to us?
Yeah, on that one, I'm actually going to say, rather than talking about it now, we've got such crystal clear instructions around this on the application that I would just use this as a plug to say, really, really follow the directions when you're doing that kind of thing. I'll say the number one reason that an application file is held up in the reading process is because something is missing or incorrectly reported around a transcript or academic history. So just read that really, really quickly to make sure that your file is moving through and ultimately able to be decisioned. Okay.
And one more, actually, just a couple more quick questions on this section before we move on. I'm going to call in a little bit of an audible, as it were. I see a number in we're not able to really monitor the Q&A closely, but I did see a few questions asking whether we're accepting the GMAT focus. Obviously, both the GMAT and the GRE are coming out with new versions in the coming months, and I think I think we do address this in the instructions, so maybe that's the answer. But since there were a number of questions about this, I thought I'd ask about the GMAT focus and as well as the shorter version of the GRE.
Yeah, we'll continue to accept all versions of the GMAT and the GRE once the focus version becomes available, and we'll continue to accept the prior versions for the 5-year validity period that has always been the case for those tests. So we will we'll accept it. We'll expect to see a blend of tests basically for the next 5 years at least.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that is a topic of on people's minds. And then one last question on this section about waivers, 2 different kinds. GMAT waivers, do they exist? And then application fee waivers. What when would those apply?
Yep. So yes to application fee waivers, and once again, there's thorough set of instructions or a thorough set of categories that you might fall into that qualify for an application fee waiver available on the application instructions. I would just flag, if you are requesting a waiver, there is a little bit of a time period there in which you have to make the request before you submit your application to see it reflected as waived. So just be mindful of that timing. I think it's a 48-hour or so window. So just be mindful if you're planning on asking for a waiver to do that in a little bit in advance of sending your sending in your application or submitting your application. We do not offer test waivers. We believe that the GMAT and the GRE are just one component of your academic preparation, but they're an important and a validated component. And so we think it's important to see that information from everyone, and hopefully we've been able to reassure you that it's not the be all end all, but we continue to think it's valuable information. And for the most consistency and fairness across the pool, we're we have that requirement for everyone.
That's good, thank you.
Are we ready to move on to something other than academics? Do you have any more ringers for me?
No, sorry, I mean, threw a curveball. No, I think we covered some good ground there, so maybe we can move on.
All right. So moving on to sort of that second bucket of information that we're trying to assess around professional impact and potential. Let's talk a little bit about things having to do with the work experience section and your resume. So we get a lot of questions about, what if I'm early career? What if I'm late career? What if I'm not, on the nose, the 5 years of average experience that you see? What are the things that I need to be thinking about when presenting my work experience?
Yeah, I think we get that question a lot, and I would say there are a few things I would say. One is, we're looking for, it's the same questions regardless of where you are in your career path. And we do have, you talk about sort of the sort of average age, for example, is maybe sort of 4 to 5 years out, but there's a range of experience within our class. We have some people who have no experience. Actually, we're part of our Silver Scholars Program for candidates coming directly from undergraduate to us at ELSOM. We have some students who have 10 or more years of experience. I tend to think of it as kind of like a bell curve. But what that means is we have lots of people coming from lots of different places, hoping to get the MBA as that transformative next step. What we tell people, I think, is it's the same question: why do you want an MBA and why now? The answer might be different depending on where you are in your career path. If you're earlier on, there might there might be reasons why you want to accelerate that MBA process, or maybe you have had a very, very successful and fulfilling career that goes beyond that 4 to 5 year, or maybe the 2 to 7 year might be the more the mid 80% range. That goes beyond that, but and you're just now maybe starting to plateau and pick your head up and say, okay, what's next? And now the learning curve is finally slowing. How can I accelerate it or pivot or do whatever I want to do to really kind of get to the place I want to get to? And so, again, depending on your particular path, that trajectory might look different, and that jumping off point for the MBA might be different. But the questions fundamentally are the same: why an MBA and why now? And we're open to your responses regardless of where you're coming from, whether it's sort of straight from undergraduate or whether it's sort of 10+ years out.
Thank you. So maybe, well, this could really be at any point of your career, but particularly if you've had more experience, what do I do if I've had many different jobs? How do I deal with putting that all together for the committee in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, no, We get that a lot. It's interesting because I feel like we tend to get two different questions, which are kind of sort of flip sides of the same coin, which is, gosh, I've had so many different experiences, different jobs. How do I present that? Or, gosh, I've only had one job my whole time, and how do I present? And I think there's always coming from the concern that that's going to put you at a disadvantage. Like, I've had so many jobs, that's not going to be viewed well, or I've only had one job and that's not going to be viewed well. I think this is another example where, again, the application process is really one of sort of reflection and self-assessment. And as you present your candidacy, you want to think about what you've gained, the experiences you've gained, the value you will add to our community, and what you will bring to it. So I don't think there's anything inherently better or worse with having many experiences or one experience. I think it's think about what you've gained from that, what that's given you, and what you then can share with the rest of the MBA class at Yale. So if you've had lots of different experiences, lots of different jobs, you've seen a broad range, you've got real breadth, good perspective on maybe certainly different organizations within industry, maybe among industries across sectors. So you've got that breadth that you can share. If you only had one job, maybe you've been able to develop a good bit of depth in that job, and you've been able to drill down and really see in detail what that role involves, and you can bring a sense of that depth and the kind of what it takes to really be in something deeply for a good bit of time. So I think this is really not something to be concerned about. Oh, gosh, I've had too many jobs or not enough jobs. It's really a matter of thinking about what you've gained and how you can present that in the application, and then obviously as a student at SOM.
Great. And so that's all a little bit backwards looking. What if we go forwards looking? Do I need to have a detailed post MBA plan?
Well, I guess I'll pull a short answer, no, but I will expand. You obviously should be coming to get an MBA for a reason. It's not as though you should be kind of running from something without having a sense of where you want to go. But you don't need to have the next 30 years of your life mapped out in great detail, and we're not going to hold you to that. Most importantly, I think that's actually in the instructions for the application. Getting back to how we're reviewing applications, and Laurel talking about the things we're trying to predict, your post-MBA plans are going to change, most likely. I think probably 3/4, if not more, of you will be doing something different than what you thought you were going to do in your application, and which is already going to be different than what you're doing now. So there's going to be a lot of fluidity to those plans, and those will evolve. When you come to Yale, you will learn about things you didn't know about. You'll talk to classmates, and you'll get exposed to new ideas, new concepts, new pathways. So those will change. For us as an admissions committee, what that means is that your post-MBA plans are a very unstable data point upon which to make decisions, because that's not what you're going to end up doing. We do have some people who do end up doing what they say they're going to do, and that's great, but lots of people who don't. And so we're not really making decisions based on what you say you want to do, where you want to go. We are looking, and we do ask in the application for you to help explain how you arrived at those your post-MBA goals, and how you kind of position yourself. We do want to get a sense of like how you're thinking about it, and it's more really to think about your thought process, how you think about these things, how you plan for these for this future path, and less about what the ultimate destination is, which as I said, we know is likely to change, or will kind of evolve over time.
Mm-hmm. And maybe a follow-up to that. So how does the committee define whether a career shift that a candidate has identified is a realistic one?
Yeah, that's another good question. And Laurel, you're probably better positioned to answer this than me, just given your as a graduate and someone who actually has been in our career development office and knows, I think, more detail. But I would say a couple of things. First of all, that's one of the reasons we're asking for your thought process in articulating those goals, is to get a sense of how thoughtful you have been, how aware you are of how realistic those goals are. I mean, I think at core, our view is that anybody who's coming into to Yale has the ability to do pretty much anything they want to do. So in the admissions committee, I think we often have if it seems like it's a little bit of a stretch, we have they'll figure it out kind of view. Like, we know that you will do well, and you will land well, and you're smart enough, and you're capable enough and talented enough that you'll get to where you want to be. but we also do want to know that you have some self-awareness and have thought through the process. So as an example, if you want to go into private equity or venture capital, that's probably a stepwise process. So if you don't have investment banking experience, you probably need to get that first before you go into PE. And maybe you need, if you don't even have any finance experience, maybe you need to do something in diversified financial services, and then investment banking, and then PE. So, and I know the path is identical, but having some awareness that there are some steps involved, I think is helpful to us to know that you are thinking about this in a really kind of in a thoughtful way. So I think, are there anything else on the sort of work experience section of the application?
I think that's a good place to sort of transition, just to make sure that we can cover some of the maybe less standard parts of the process, or the parts that are more variable from program to program.
Sure. Well, maybe we could transition to sort of the essay question, which I know is a topic that is always of interest to potential applicants. And for those of you who haven't opened the application or don't know, we have one required essay, and it's a choice of 3 prompts, which is to describe your biggest commitment, to describe your most meaningful community, or the most meaningful community you've been a part of, and to describe the greatest challenge you've faced. And so you choose one of those 3 and write about that. And so I guess the most fundamental question is, why are those the 3 questions we're asking?
Yeah, so I see the whole set of prompts as part of a whole, and it's really reflective of what we value as a community here at Yale. And so for because we can never say it enough, the mission of Yale SOM is to educate leaders for business and society. And so we want to bring people into this community who will embrace this mission, who care about making an impact on whatever goal they set themselves to, or community that they find themselves, or organization that they find themselves a part of. And the people who do this tend to be people who are self-reflective, who learn from their past experiences, who see something through to the end, even when it isn't easy. And I think these 3 prompts give 3 slightly different, although potentially overlapping, opportunities to show us how you've approached something that's really important within your life. And, as I mentioned before, we're big believers within our application process that the best predictors of how you behave in the future are how you've behaved in the past, and how you've learned from past experiences, how you've responded to those experiences. And so this is one of those places where our application looks for evidence, not just of your aspirations, but of your actions. And so these questions are all really grounded in the experiences that you've had to date, and giving you an opportunity to tell us about a really important experience or part of your life, just through slightly different lenses of a commitment or a community or a challenge that you face. And sometimes your response might fit into more than one of those categories, and that's fine too.
And thank you for that. And do you have any advice for candidates about how they should think about which prompt to respond to?
I think perhaps the best thing to do is, looking at these prompts as a whole, just do a little bit of thinking of, when you think about the biggest, most meaningful parts of your life, what comes to mind? And chances are there's 2 or 3 things that are immediately going to pop into your head. And from there, go towards what's the one that I feel most comfortable writing about. Like, I feel like I'll have the most to say, or that my application would be incomplete without being able to share this aspect of myself. And that, I think, will often suggest one of the prompts. And if it doesn't, don't stress about it too much. I think you can, in some ways, tell about the same experience through multiple ones of these prompts. And we're not really judging which one you've picked. It's more, we really are just looking to give you an opportunity to tell your story in the way that feels most natural and comfortable to you.
Yeah. And this is maybe a variation on that, which I think a few people had asked about, is, are you looking for different things with each prompt?
No, I mean, it's, again, the common thread is we want to hear about what's most important to you, what matters to you most. And so that's what we're looking to get a sense of through each of them. Obviously, you'll get at that through slightly different means, whether you're talking about your involvement in a community versus a challenge that you've been facing. But again, ultimately, that the heart of it is being able to share how you've approached something really big within your life. And so I would think about it that way. That's what we're looking to get out of your responses to every single one of those prompts.
Yep, makes sense. And I guess one other question that I think people often ask is, should I write about something personal or professional? Does that matter?
Yeah, there's no right answer to that. I think you can have a really strong and meaningful, personally meaningful response in either of those categories. And you know, those lines aren't always so straightforward either. I mean, you may have committed your personal life, or sorry, your professional life to something that is, you know, personally been an important, you know, driver for you. So I don't even think that it's so straightforward that way. But what I would just encourage you to do is really think about, are there things that we're not capturing elsewhere within your application that are important for us to know? And so there are a lot of areas of the application that prompt for professional experience. We have your resume, we have the work experience section, we're getting 2 professional letters of recommendation. So we do have a fair bit of information about your professional life. We certainly don't have all of it. And you could have faced an extremely significant challenge, for instance, in your professional life that is not coming through in those other elements. So I'm not saying this to indicate that we've already got everything we need, but I would just say, stretch yourself to think about, are there aspects of your candidacy which you haven't already had a chance to demonstrate? Because there isn't as much space for talking about your personal experiences, I think, in some of the more standardized parts of the application.
Okay, that makes sense. Just a couple other quick ones. One, I know this often comes up a lot too, is candidates are asked whether they need to discuss why Yale or why an MBA in the essay.
Yeah, the short answer is no. And I would really steer yourself away from that in order to give yourself the space of those 500 words, which can go pretty quickly, to talk about yourself, your challenge or your commitment or your community, and back it up with how you have approached that thing over time. To have to jam into there, why you want to go to Yale that's not going to be the best use of your space. There's other parts of the application in which you'll get to reflect on, on your interest in being a part of this community.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And then just generally, any other general essay question guidance you have for candidates who are thinking about, writing about, putting together an application and writing the essay?
Yeah, definitely look at the follow-up questions that we've shared for each of those prompts. Bruce shared the overall question, but we do have a couple of guiding questions that follow each. I think that should help, be a good thought starter for you. I already shared how to kind of don't overthink the topic. We're actually not really making value judgments about what the commitment or the community or the challenges that you've faced. Like I said, we're more interested in understanding that approach. And so don't worry about what you think a good commitment or community or challenge might be. And I'd say, I think this applies maybe mostly to the commitment and to maybe the challenge is, it doesn't have to be something that's been neatly tied up in the end. Intentionally, we didn't ask you what is a challenge that you've overcome. I mean, maybe it's something that you're still in the thick of. Maybe it's something that doesn't actually ever have a resolution to it, and it's just something kind of ongoing that you face. I think oftentimes these sorts of prompts cue, like, what is my success story here? What is the thing that I can show that I've done at the end of the day? And again, that's not really the framework through which we're evaluating them. We want to know about your process. We want to know about how you've approached something. I keep sort of saying approach, but that's really truly what we're thinking about here. So I would frame it that way, and not worry so much about what is a success story that I can share.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to leave a little bit of time for a couple of the other unique aspects of the application that we teed up earlier. So the video questions and the behavioral assessment, again, I think are fairly unique to our process. And so, Bruce, I don't know if you want to give a real quick overview of what the video questions are, and then I have one or two kind of specific things to follow up with on that.
Yeah, sure. So in the video questions behavior assessment, those are both elements of the application that you will get access to after your initial submission. So once you hit submit, you get access to those two, and they're available to you for a couple of days after the deadline. They each take, I would say 20 to 25 minutes probably to complete. The video questions are 3 pre-recorded questions. We've recorded them. After you submit the application, you get access to our partner platform, Kira Talent, where you will have opportunity. You can do some practice responses, but basically you will be able to access these 3 randomized questions, the 3 tranches of questions, not trick questions, not anything difficult, but really questions you should be able to answer without any preparation. And you will get access to those questions. You will, you sort of hear the question. You'll have a short amount of time, sort of 20 to 30 seconds to think about a response, and then sort of depending on the question, 60 to 90 seconds to give your sort of in the moment extemporaneous response. And so just using your webcam and kind of speaking into the camera, give your response, which will then be recorded and saved and added to your file, the 3 responses. So that's in broad strokes what the video questions are about.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So thinking about, you do have that little period of time to think about your response. Would you advise an applicant to use that time, jotting down notes or crafting a question? Like how would you use that time?
Yeah, those sort of 20, 30 seconds, that's what we call the think time, where you're thinking about your response. And again, these are not challenging questions. They're not going to require, sort of tremendous amount of sort of, preparation or sort of thought beforehand. But, we do want to, I guess, I don't know, Laura, I would say if you do write down notes to help you remember, keep it brief. You're not, you shouldn't be reading a response when you're giving your response. These are meant to be, as I said, extemporaneous. They're meant to be in the moment. We know they're not rehearsed. We know, they're not going to be perfect. And I guess maybe to ease some of the anxiety, because I think it's a somewhat different element, and as a result, it's maybe something that people are less familiar with and maybe have a little bit more, maybe a little more stress about. It's not, we use these with a light touch. It's not a heavy lift in the admissions decision. If anything, we use it to lift people up and allow you to present a different part of yourself than we would see elsewhere. But it's not meant to as a heavy sword in terms of the evaluation process. And again, it's not meant to be perfect. We know this is a very much in the moment response. So you can jot some notes, but don't be reading, don't be writing a whole, you won't have time for it, but it's probably not what you want to be doing anyway when you're giving your response.
Makes sense. And the other sort of thing we've teased a couple times, I think, throughout the session today is the behavioral assessment. And I'd love to get a chance to talk about this just a little bit, because I think we use this in a way that is probably not how most people would expect, having gone through the process of taking it. So can you maybe just give us a brief overview of what the behavioral assessment is, how we're using it, and what a candidate can do to prepare?
Yeah, and again, it's another post-submission element. It also takes probably about 20 to 25 minutes to complete in a sitting. And the structure is I think 130 paired statements. It's a forced choice test. So you get 2 pairs of statements that could describe a person, describe you, qualities, and then you choose which one is most like you. It could be 2 positive things, 2 negative things. The negative ones are a little tougher because it's kind of what's most like you in a negative, at least unlike you in some sense. And the idea is through this repetition of 130, it's dynamic and adaptive. So through this 130 pairs of statements, we get a picture of you as a person. And it's not an EQ test. It's not a soft skills test. I think that's where the confusion comes in. It's not meant to measure a completely different element. It's meant to measure a set of interpersonal traits that then inform our evaluation of your academic background and academic potential. And it provides greater insight. And really the motivation behind it, we developed it, well, we didn't develop, this was actually developed by the US military for officer development, was purchased by ETS. We've been working with ETS since they purchased this to develop this in this context. It's mostly for professional development. But the idea behind it is to allow us to expand the range of candidates so that we look at. So if it informs your academic background and it can help lift up candidates who maybe have a more modest background, but who we really would love to have here at Yale. It can give us more confidence in your ability to perform in the Yale classroom. And that's really how we're using it. It's not a standalone EQ or soft skills test.
That's a good overview. So with that in mind, what should or can a candidate do to prepare?
Oh, yes, that's nothing. There's no need to prepare. It's really, these are not questions. It's not, it's not like, a quiz show or something, or we're not testing knowledge. You're just answering questions about yourself. And so you should already know those answers, hopefully. The idea is just go, it's really what your first instinct. Shouldn't try to overthink it. Just answer the questions as they come up. And again, 20-25 minutes for 130 pairs of questions means you're not going to be lingering on any one. You're just going to be going rather quickly, and it should just be based on your knowledge of yourself and how you see yourself in those two pairs of statements.
So speaking of quiz shows, I think this is the portion where we get to turn to our lightning round of Yale and New Haven trivia before we close things out. So we could be in the hot seat a little bit. I think, you want to kick this off?
Yeah, no, happy to do our speed round of Yale New Haven trivia, our insights, and then we do have one at the very end. We'll give our overall last bit of overall best application advice beforehand. So this is New Haven. So the first question, best pizza.
For me, it's bar. I like the red pie with hot cherry peppers on top. How about you?
Good answer. That's a good answer. I have a whole convoluted answer coming up with where the best red pie, like the best plain, the best.
Keep it simple. We have 3 minutes.
I'm going to keep it classic. I'm going to go with Pepe's. My overall favorite.
Favorite place to eat that is not pizza.
Okay, which people might not realize there are a lot of those choices. New Haven's actually a fantastic food town. I'm going to go House of Naan, great Indian food. There are lots of Indian places, but that's my favorite. And they're yeah. So how about you? Best non-pizza food place?
It is tough. I'm going to go with Mecha, which is a ramen noodle house, although there's even more than one good ramen places.
That's a good one. All right, how about best coffee shop?
This one is actually a little further afield from Central Yale, but I'm going to go with Pistachio, which there's now 2 locations of. Actually, one a little bit closer, but it's a sort of a Turkish Syrian coffee house. Really good pastries.
Yeah, again, I could give you a number of different answers on that one. I think I was going to say common grounds, but I think I'm going to go with coffee. K and a question mark. It's probably the one that's closest to the SOM campus, but it's also really good. It's a great place to hang out and just to relax.
Yeah. How about best ice cream?
I mean, this is a no-brainer for me because I worked there in high school, but I'm gonna go with Ashley's. That's kind of the classic New Haven. In fact, actually, I know we're getting close to time. My oldest daughter is going back to college this weekend, and for dinner tonight, she asked for the classic New Haven combo, which is Pepe's pizza and Ashley's ice cream for dessert.
I think I'd say Ashley's too, but just for sake of differentiation, maybe Arethusa Farm is a close second for me.
All right, I think you've got the next one. I think you've got a leg up on me since you actually were both an undergrad and an SOM student here. But what's your favorite place to study in New Haven or at Yale?
Sterling Memorial Library, which is sort of the main central library at Yale, which literally looks like a cathedral. It's just a very awe-inspiring place to study, and a good place to buckle down because you see everyone else around you doing the same thing. So I'm going to go with Sterling. Have you done any studying at Yale?
I don't know. I think my studying days preceded my time at Yale, but actually, it's kind of Sterling adjacent, so the Bass Library, which is kind of, it used to be cross campus, right? And it actually is underground. There's a sort of green above it, but it's all underneath the ground, and it's actually kind of there are nice study spaces there too.
Mm-hmm. All right, last one. Best hidden gem or kind of off the beaten path place in or around New Haven.
Yeah, I don't know how hidden this is, but it's the Beinecke Rare Book Library. It's right in the center of Yale, but I think people often pass by it, and it's amazing. It's like this one of the most, I think, one of the best rare book libraries in the world. It has on permanent display. It has a Guggenheim you can go and look at. I think it has a second Guggenheim in storage, but it's just an amazing, awe-inspiring place. So that's what I would choose. How about you?
Yeah, I'll go outside of Yale for this one. I'm going with The Place. So it's probably about 25 minutes away from Yale or so, but on the close to the shore. It is a sort of outdoor barbecue, BYOB kind of place where everyone literally sits on tree stumps and eats it, but it's really different and a lot of fun. So maybe we should close out with actual application advice.
Yeah.
And we'll leave
Yeah,
more
we're
to be
right at time, but I know
discovered
we have
about
a
Yale and New
few.
Haven.
Oh, sorry, I spoke over you.
Go ahead.
No, I know we're right at time, but we have just a few kind of like overarching some pieces of advice. Just to, I think we probably touched on these things, but just to reiterate and emphasize, the first one I would say is, I mean, hopefully from this session you've got a sense that there's no template, there's no kind of mold within which every application and every applicant must fit. We're looking for a diverse, bring together a diverse community of students, and that means we're looking for lots of different things. And what might be, you know, the most meaningful in one application maybe is different in another one. So I guess the advice I would give, which you probably hear from other schools, is really don't try to stick out. Don't try to tell us what you think we want to hear. Don't try to sort of shape your application based on what you think we're looking for. So be true to yourself, you know, present yourself as you are. And I think that's the best way to stand out. I think one thing we always say, you know, this applies to essays and writing generally, but I think the application more broadly, you know, you will present a more compelling, your most compelling candidacy if you are talking about the things you truly care about and that are truly meaningful to you. That will shine through. And then just an answer, a corollary to that, like from a game theory perspective, if everybody's trying to present the version of themselves they think we want to see, you know, you're going to try to differentiate yourself, but kind of counterintuitively or perversely, you're actually going to be presenting yourself more like other people, and so you're actually going to stick out less. So really, stay true to who you are, and that's where you will kind of present your best candidacy.
I think maybe an addendum to that is, you know, be humble, embrace your mistakes. We're not expecting perfection from anyone. We know that you're all in the process of learning. That's part of why you're coming to business school. And so don't feel as though you need to kind of sugarcoat or wash over, you know, any perceived weakness. I don't even like using that word within your application, but things that you're still building and still trying to learn. That's okay. Better to get out in front of them and acknowledge than, you know, to try to pretend like you've got it all figured out already.
Yeah. Another thing I would say is follow our lead. As we talked about, we've tried to be thoughtful in how we're constructing the application. We're asking for specific pieces of information at specific points, and so you know, be sensitive that respond to the questions we're asking for, maybe not what you thought we would ask or what you want us to have asked. It's so kind of, the essay was an example of that. You don't have to say why Yale, why SOM. You answer the prompts, and that applies to other parts as well. You know, we've put this application together. It's sort of like a dialogue between us and you, and we've kind of presented the questions. You answer those questions, and it's kind of a you know, a back and forth. And so just be mindful of what we're asking and answer those questions, and not necessarily what, you know, things you wish we had asked for or you know, wanted to tell us about.
I think my last point is, you know, once you've had a chance to go through the application as a whole, take a step back and just make sure that you've been able to communicate the things that you want to communicate. As Bruce indicated, there's no one right prescriptive way to answer each part of it, but as a whole, you should come away feeling like you've been able to give us a sense of the things that we talked about: your academic preparation, your professional impact and potential, and your community involvement. And again, don't worry too much about how exactly you were able to tell that story through each individual component, but do you feel good about it as a whole? Is it presenting, you know, the efforts of your self-reflection that you've gone into this process with? And can you leave feeling like you've told us everything that we need to know in order to assess your candidacy?
That's great. And then the last thing, I know we're a couple minutes over, but the last thing I would say is don't overthink it. I wouldn't go so far as to say have fun with the process, because I know this, you know, it can be stressful, but we have tried to make it simple, straightforward. You know, we're trying to get the information we need to make our decision, so in that sense, you know, kind of don't try and kind of get yourself turned around trying to sort of outthink it or overthink it. Just answer the questions. I would say it's a process of, I've said before, so reflection, self-assessment, it's introspection. You should know more about yourself after the process than you did before, and that should hopefully be a good thing. And the positive byproduct is then you'll get into an MBA program and you'll go somewhere fantastic, and it'll be a transformative experience. But you know, really take the process on its terms and don't try and to kind of go, overthink how you're doing it. So that's the last thing I would say.
I think with that, we should wrap since we went a little bit over time. But thank you for sticking around for sure. We really enjoyed this opportunity to get to share a little bit about how we put together our applications with you in mind. And so we're really looking forward to getting a chance to review hopefully many of your applications in the coming year or beyond if you're looking a little bit further out from there. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, there are a lot of resources available to help you along the way, even if you don't retain everything that we've been talking about today. So we hope you'll find those useful and certainly reach out and be in touch if there are other questions.
Thanks so much and good luck.
Weekend. Yeah.
Yep.